70, part 11, we're now talking about how the wrists work within the swing. And again, if the left shoulder coil is affecting the backswing, the wrists behave as they should. But let's just break down the elements just to give it a bit more understanding. Can you imagine if your wrist was in a plaster of Paris cast and had no mobility? It'd be quite hard to throw and release a dart. You could do it, but you'd be hindered. A good dart action has an element of wrist hinge. And I was playing golf with Willie Thorne, the snooker player, one day, and I said, Willie, is it true that if the wrist stays stiff, the cue would rise and fall? He goes, yes. He said the wrist hinge keeps the cue level back and through. You can imagine someone stirring a big bowl of eggs. If I let the wrist go, it trebles the speed of the whisk. There's the arm speed, but the wrist acts quicker. Now, for anyone above 50, this is a really important health check. The older we get, the more cautious we become. And we don't mean to do it, but we end up holding the club too tightly, locking the forearms and jamming the wrists. Because you subconsciously and intuitively think that if your wrists are creative and movable and oily and, they're improvising movement, you'll think you won't be accurate. But you will be. You'll be more accurate. Okay? You're going to throw a dart beautifully with a bit of wrist hinge. You're going to be hindered with no wrist hinge. So, it's a happy coincidence that the good Lord knew all about golf when He made us, because if I turn sideways to you and I hold the club properly with a parallel left thumb, guess what? The wrist cocks to 90 degrees. Now, a wedge is a shorter club, so it has to find a lot more wrist hinge in the backswing. A driver is a longer club, so it doesn't have to find. So the way the wrists work in the golf swing varies with the club. So if you turn your left shoulder under the throat with a wedge, you will be wristy. And if you turn your shoulder with a driver, you'll be less wristy. So we're recognizing that wrist hinge is essential, but we're also appreciating that it's the shoulder turn and the club that you're using that governs how much wrist action you have. And what I can tell you is, if the wrists are stiff, you tend to hit the ball low and a bit thin. And if you're too wristy, you'll hit the ball high and a bit choppy and a bit heavy. The skill is to blend the shoulder turn to the wrist hinge. So when we go back to our horizontal drill, I'm now going left shoulder, and look, that's wrist hinge. I can turn my left shoulder and jam the wrists. But if I relax, as the shoulder coils, the wrists behave as they should. So you senior golfers, 55 and above, just remember what I'm saying. The older you get, the less you hinge your wrists. It's the killer. Because if the wrist shut down, your left arm bends, you lose your power, and all sorts of things go wrong. So we go back to Explanar. Resting the power roller in the hoop. The left shoulder is igniting the swing. There's a left shoulder turn. Now, the wrists, there's no reason not to hinge 90 degrees. You can see you'll be faster. If you go to here and tense, much slower. Let the wrist respond to the shoulder turn. So, your body will determine how much wrist hinge you have. Your wrist hinge will depend upon how tightly you hold the club. You mustn't choke it to death. Subconsciously, you might think that if you hinge your wrist, you'll be less accurate. But trust me, if you don't hinge the wrist, you'll be more unruly. Wrist hinge will give you speed and it will give you accuracy. I know that's counterintuitive, but it's true, and that's how I make a living telling you. You load the shoulder and the wrist hinges to 90. You release, guess what? It hinges to 90. That's the way the good Lord made you. Now you'll hear me mention a few times how generous Mr. Butch Harmon has been to me over the years, advocating Explanar and using it at his school at Rio Seco in Las Vegas. I first met Mr. Harmon at the Red Bull Teaching Conference in 2003 at Celtic Manor, and the top 40 coaches were invited to go to sit under the tutelage of Butch Harmon and his two brothers, Dick and Bill. On the second day, early morning of the conference, before it all started, Bill was hitting shots out of the driving range bay at Celtic Manor, and he was hitting the ball really quite indifferently. And he turned to me and he said, Luther, what am I doing wrong? Well, I said, what you're doing wrong, Bill, is you have an extended left thumb. And what that does, it means that the wrist has no articulation. And when the thumb is long, it makes the wrist bowed. So all I asked him to do was to get his left thumb level with the first joint of the index finger. Now, I knew that when he went back, his wrist would want to hinge. But his thumb was so long before that he didn't have any wrist hinge. So I gave him that very simple piece of advice. I improved the positioning of his left thumb on the club, in the pad of the thumb, and he started the ball very sweetly, a lovely high, soft, neutral draw. And there he was, hitting the ball away. And his brother Butch came through this door on a mission to the next bay. But as he went past Bill and myself, he noticed Bill's swing on the monitor at floor level. And out of the corner of his eye, as he passed it, he stopped in his tracks and goes, that's different. And Bill pointed at me and said, yeah, you just changed my grip. So Butch goes, show me. So I've got a rather lovely photograph of me on my knees, fixing Mr. Harmon's grip and showing him how the left thumb bone should be applied to the club. So he said, I'd never been shown that before. The following May in Golf Digest, there was a nice 2-page article by Butch Harmon on the benefits of the short left thumb. But I can't complain, because from that day to this, Mr. Harmon has been a kind encourager of myself and a great endorser of the Explanar teaching aid. So going back to Bill Harmon, obviously a great golfer, top 100 teacher, but that old left thumb had snuck down the handle and created a problem. By getting the left thumb to be neutral, parallel to the shaft, it reignited his wrist hinge and he got the benefit of a sweet, neutral and accurate shot. If I only gave you one lesson to last a lifetime, it would probably be the positioning of the left thumb, because the left thumb controls the way the wrist hinge works in the swing, and with that the forearm rotation as well. So it's a small element, but it's a key. And remember, the left shoulder is what creates the amount of wrist hinge that you have.